1 million years ago, humans were not alone. Another species walked the earth. Not animals. Not predators. But beings, strangely familiar, yet less evolved. And one night, our ancestors came face to face with them. The night was heavy, the kind that pressed down on the chest until every breath felt borrowed. The fire in the cave sputtered and hissed, its glow clinging desperately to the rough stone walls. Shadows danced and twisted, stretching into monstrous shapes that seemed alive, but the true terror was not born of flame or stone. It lurked outside, in the darkness where even the fire dared not reach. You can hear them before you see them. A rustle of branches, a shift of weight in the brush, the sound of something breathing, slow, uneven, waiting. The forest is alive with whispers, yet none belong to beasts you know. The hair at the back of your neck stiffens. You know the silence that follows predators. But this silence feels different. It feels like being watched by something that remembers what it once was, and envies what you have become. Then, a shape. Just beyond the edge of the firelight, it steps forward. At first you think it could be one of your own, strayed too far, lost in the trees. But the longer you stare, the more wrong it feels. The shoulders too sloped, the skull too heavy, the jaw too wide. A face both human and not, caught between familiarity and horror. Its eyes glint with reflection from the flames, and in that instant, you know, it is not animal. It is not kin. It is something caught in between. The others gather close. Mothers press their children against their chests. Hunters raise crude blades chipped from stone. Yet the air is so thick with dread that no one dares move. For every figure you see, you sense more behind it. The forest hides them, cloaks them, but their presence presses in from every side. They are watching, dozens of them, breathing, crouching, shifting. Their silence is worse than any roar. The fire spits, a burst of sparks leaping into the air, and for a heartbeat the shadows reveal too much. Faces, dozens of them. Faces that look almost like your own, yet marked by something older, something unfinished. Their lips curl back, not quite in speech, not quite in snarl, as though even they cannot decide what they are. Your mind reels. You wonder, do they think? Do they plot? Do they hunger for the meat of beasts, or for the safety of your fire, or for the life you are clinging to with trembling hands? Are they a mirror of what you were, or a warning of what you might become if you falter? The night presses closer, and you realize this is not merely a chance encounter. It is a test. A question of who will remain when the dawn breaks. 1 million years ago, humans were not alone. And the moment came when our ancestors stood face to face with another species, strangely familiar, yet less evolved. What happened when the first humans confronted a rival species? If you've listened this far and still haven't subscribed to Tale of History, ask yourself this: why take knowledge without giving back? Others honor this journey by subscribing. Will you be one of those who silently watch, or one who supports the preservation of history? The night fades, and with it, the fragile protection of the fire. Dawn reveals a world that is no less hostile than the shadows that came before. 1 million years ago, the earth was not the cradle of abundance it would one day become. It was a battlefield of survival, shaped by shifting climates and merciless scarcity. The Ice Age gripped the land in cycles, glaciers crawling across continents, carving mountains and rivers, forcing life to retreat and adapt or die. Summers were brief, cruelly short, winters long and punishing. Each day was borrowed time, each breath a defiance of the cold that gnawed at the bone. Hunger was a constant companion. Every step outside the safety of stone and fire meant danger, for predators roamed these lands too, saber-toothed cats with jaws like traps, hyenas large enough to tear through flesh and bone, and towering beasts whose size alone could crush the fragile bodies of humans. And yet, the greatest enemy was not the lion's roar or the mammoth's charge. It was the emptiness of the stomach. Food was the first law. To eat was to live, to fail was to vanish. The earliest humans learned this with every failed hunt, with every child who did not see another season. Fire became their most sacred possession, not only for warmth against the frost, but for warding off the night terrors that stalked beyond its glow. Life in these days was a cycle of risk and return. At dawn, small groups left the cave or the sheltering rocks to track herds across valleys and forests. Armed with little more than sharpened stone and determination, they chased antelopes, scavenged carcasses left by predators, and dug for roots when the hunt failed. Their bodies bore the marks of this life, scarred, battered, hardened against the elements. Death was always close, a shadow at the edge of every step. But even in this unforgiving age, humans rose above mere survival. They shaped tools with intent. Stone flakes sharpened into blades, bones carved into points. With every generation, the hand grew steadier, the mind sharper. The first sparks of thought beyond instinct began to burn. There were many of them, these ancestors scattered across the earth. Homo habilis, the handy man, shaping crude stone tools nearly 2 million years ago. Homo erectus, standing tall, fire in their hands, their footprints carried far across continents. Early Homo sapiens, not yet what we are, but close enough that in their eyes you would see something recognizable. Curiosity, fear, the flicker of imagination. They were all bound to the same truth: the world was too small, too cruel, to welcome more than one victor. Archaeological traces tell us their migrations were relentless. Driven by cold, by hunger, by the desperate pull of survival, they spread from Africa across the vastness of Eurasia. Every mile walked meant new dangers, rivers that swallowed, storms that tore skin and bone, strange lands where new beasts ruled. But they went on, because to remain was to starve, and to starve was to surrender. Stone tools, discovered in riverbeds and caves, speak of this struggle. Simple at first, sharp flakes to slice, to cut. Then more refined, hand axes, spears hardened in fire, tools of bone. These were not only weapons, but symbols of a new kind of power. Power to change the environment, to tip the balance between hunter and hunted. Power to face not just beast, but rival. This was the stage upon which the first true confrontation was set. A world of ice and hunger, of fire and fear. A world too narrow for mercy, where survival belonged only to the most cunning, the most united, the most relentless. And when paths crossed between humans and those less evolved shadows, there was no room for peace. Only one could endure. Think about it, these people struggled against extinction so you could exist today. The least you can do is subscribe to Tale of History to keep their story alive. Or don't, but admit in the comments why their sacrifice isn't worth one click. They were not myths, nor phantoms imagined around dying fires. They were real, flesh, blood, bone. Rivals that walked the same earth as our ancestors, though shaped differently, carrying the marks of an unfinished design. Some were small, barely the height of a child, their skulls rounded, their faces crude, their hands clumsy with tools that splintered more than they cut. These were the Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbits of history, discovered much later in the caves of Indonesia. Others were far older, Homo naledi, buried deep in South African caverns, their remains hidden like whispers of a forgotten line. Still others, remnants of early Homo erectus, lingered in remote lands, caught between beast and man, unable to keep pace with the march of progress. To stand before them would not have been a meeting of equals. Humans carried the fire, literally and figuratively. Their brains, heavier, more complex, gave birth to strategy, to speech, to memory that stretched beyond the immediate moment. They gathered around flames and shared knowledge, passing wisdom from elder to child. Their tools were sharper, more deliberate, born not of chance but of intent. They looked at stone and saw weapons. They looked at wood and saw spears. They looked at each other and saw allies. But the rivals had none of this. Their tools were rough, scattered, rarely perfected. Their hunts were uncoordinated, desperate scrambles rather than planned strikes. Their bonds were weaker, fractured by instinct and fear. Where humans stood shoulder to shoulder, they were scattered, unguarded, vulnerable to the tide of extinction already rising around them. Yet, in their eyes, there must have been recognition. They knew us, in some ancient way. Perhaps they envied the spark they could not hold. Perhaps they feared it. Fossil records and stone artifacts tell fragments of this story, tools crudely shaped beside more refined ones, bones bearing cut marks that speak of both violence and hunger. And within our own DNA, small traces remain, whispers of contact, proof that when paths crossed, there were moments not only of violence, but of mixing. Not all encounters ended in bloodshed. Some ended in legacy, written silently in the bloodline of humanity itself. Still, the balance was uneven. Every meeting was survival sharpened into conflict. For humans, to allow them space was to risk competition. To share land, water, and prey was to gamble with scarcity. And in an age where hunger carved itself into bone, where cold hollowed out the body, there was no room for generosity. There could only be dominance. When paths crossed, they must have stared at one another in tense silence, each recognizing the other as more than beast, less than kin. A mirror warped by time. A shadow that threatened to stretch too far. And slowly, inevitably, that silence cracked into confrontation. You're still watching. That means you care. So why hold back? Subscribe to Tale of History now, or tell us in the comments what holds you back from honoring the very history you're fascinated by. They met not in peace, but in necessity. Picture a clearing at the edge of a forest, its silence broken by the groan of hunger in two throats, one human, one other. The prey was scarce, the hunt dangerous, and the world was never generous. A herd of antelope, cornered, driven, would feed one tribe, but never two. And so, when paths crossed, it was not the antelope's fate in question, but theirs. For early humans, fire was already a weapon, its smoke choking, its heat scalding, its flames a wall between fear and safety. To wield fire was to command the night. Their rivals, less cunning, less daring, still cowered in darkness, still fumbled with crude stones, still broke bone with hand instead of hammer. And yet, desperation makes beasts of all creatures. They crept close. They reached for what they did not earn. And humans, our ancestors, did not yield. Imagine the clash, sharpened stone in one hand, bone club in the other. Not war as we understand it today, with strategy and banners and glory. No. This was survival distilled to its cruelest essence: strike first or starve, spill blood or lose your place at the fire. Fossil records whisper of cracked skulls, fractured ribs, bones buried with marks that no predator's teeth could make. These were not accidents of the hunt. These were wounds inflicted by hands shaped like ours, but belonging to something different. Anthropologists uncover clues: charred remains in caves, fractured tools beside skeletons, fragments of DNA threaded through our own blood. These remnants tell a story that science dares not say aloud, that humanity's rise was not a gentle merging, but a violent erasure. Every discovery of primitive tools near human campsites suggests competition. Every absence of rival species in fertile land suggests conquest. It was not lions. It was not wolves. It was not the terror of nature that pushed our kind to its edge. No, the fiercest predator we faced was a face like our own, yet alien in its silence, in its lack of fire, in its lesser spark. That was the battle of 1,000,000 years ago. Not survival against the wild. Survival against the almost human. And when those encounters erupted into violence, it was a war without rules, without pity, without mercy. Children were not spared. The weak were not protected. This was not brutality, it was mathematics. If food was to last, if water was to be guarded, if caves were to be claimed, one tribe had to vanish. And so one by one, they did. The rivals dwindled. Their bones lie scattered in caves, their faces forgotten but for skulls reconstructed in laboratories, their voices silenced except in our blood, where fragments of their DNA still linger like ghosts. Think of what this means. Humanity was not simply born. Humanity killed, clawed, and burned its way to the throne of this earth. Our dominance was not gifted. It was stolen, taken in smoke and screams, in clashes that left the soil red and the air trembling. And yet here you are, safe, untouched, alive in a world built on those battles. Entire species vanished so that you could one day sit in warmth, watching history told through glowing screens. But you cannot even give a gesture in return. These were life and death confrontations. And you, comfortable, protected, entertained, cannot confront your own hesitation to subscribe? If you choose silence, then at least share in the comments why you think this channel doesn't deserve your support. Because your ancestors fought so you wouldn't have to. Fire. It was not just light in the dark, it was a wall between life and death. When humans learned to command flame, they did more than chase away the beasts of the night. They bent the rhythm of nature itself. Food was no longer chewed raw with breaking teeth, it was softened, its nutrients unlocked, fueling bigger brains and longer endurance. The rivals, those less evolved species who lingered in the shadows, never learned this mastery. To them, the night remained a terror. To us, it became a weapon. And then there were tools. Not crude shards of stone hacked into clumsy edges, but refined instruments of purpose, blades that could skin faster, points that could pierce deeper, hammers that could break bone and open the marrow within. Tools turned humans into predators more efficient than claw or fang. The rivals struck stones together and hoped. Humans carved intention into every weapon. But the greatest leap was not in the hand. It was in the tongue. Language, the invisible net that bound one mind to another. With words came warnings, strategy, memory. With language came the teaching of the young, the preservation of experience, the ability to pass on not just survival, but culture. The rivals could gesture, they could grunt, but they could not share vision. They could not weave minds together. Humans could. And in that weaving, a tribe was no longer many bodies, it was one body, many limbs. Cooperation was the superpower. Where rivals fought alone or in fractured groups, humans formed bonds stronger than blood. They hunted as units. They defended as families. They mourned their dead. They planned their future. And when they faced the others, those almost human beings who looked like distorted reflections, it was not instinct that won. It was unity. The rivals began to vanish. Not all at once, not with a single blow, but piece by piece. Some starved. Some were driven from waterholes. Some were absorbed through fragile unions, their genes scattered within us like whispers of ghosts. But most simply faded, their fires never lit, their tools never sharpened, their stories never spoken. Their disappearance was our survival. Every advantage humans held, the flame, the tool, the word, the bond, stacked against them until their presence shrank into fossils buried deep beneath the soil. They were beings like us, yet they could not become us. And so we inherited the earth. The fragile, brutal lottery of survival crowned humans as its heirs. But the victory was not without cost, nor without shadow. To win was to erase. And in erasing them, we became the only story left to tell. But here you are, listening. Safe, comfortable, alive because of choices made 1,000,000 years before your birth. Your ancestors adapted. They fought. They survived. And if they had not, you would not exist to hear these words. So let me ask you, if they could adapt in the face of extinction, why can't you adapt enough to hit the subscribe button? Perhaps you think you don't belong in the circle of those who carry this history forward. If so, say it in the comments. But if you believe survival deserves memory, prove it now. Subscribe. Be part of the lineage that remembers. Their bones are gone. Their fires have long been cold. The shelters they built have rotted back into the earth, erased by wind and time. Yet they are not completely absent. For in the blood of modern humans, faint whispers of their existence still breathe. When scientists study our DNA, they uncover fragments that do not belong entirely to us. Pieces that came from those other beings we once confronted, those rivals who shared our world before being consumed by silence. Neanderthal traces lie in the skin and bones of billions today. Tiny percentages, small enough to be overlooked, yet undeniable. A reminder that survival was not always destruction. Sometimes it was union. Sometimes it was merging. Their voices are silent. Their names are forgotten. But their legacy lingers in the curvature of a jawline, in the rhythm of an immune system, in the spark of resilience passed from mother to child across unbroken centuries. We carry them unknowingly, and in that truth lies a haunting paradox: humanity did not erase them completely. Humanity absorbed them. And yet, the greater truth is darker still. For though they live within us, their story is not their own anymore. It has been consumed by ours. The traces that remain are not theirs to speak with, they are ours to interpret, to twist, to bury beneath the comfort of our triumph. They survive, but voiceless. They endure, but erased. This is the true legacy of the confrontation. Survival is never clean. It is not the neat cutting of one thread and the flourishing of another. It is threads tangled, knotted, frayed. Some cut short. Some hidden. Some stolen. Humanity's dominance was built not just on our own genius, but on the silence of those who once stood beside us and against us. And so the question is not simply, why did they vanish? The question is, what parts of them now walk the earth inside you? What fragments of their fear, their strength, their failure, still echo in your blood? You may never know. But their presence is undeniable. The story of humanity is not only written in triumphs. It is carved in the bones we no longer find, in the languages never spoken again, in the eyes that closed for the last time as the fire of our kind consumed the night. It is carved in silence, deep, irreversible silence. Remember this when you speak of history as victory. For victory is never pure. Victory is haunted. This is tale of history. We tell the stories others forget. If this journey moved you, honor it. Subscribe. If you refuse, then speak, tell us why in the comments. History will remember your silence, or your voice.